He was never pulled away from a central motive, and that motive was loving us, loving those disciples, and through them loving us. And so, this is such a simple point. That's why I was kind of feeling nervous about it as the culminating one in the, let's focus on Easter. Because there's so much drama just hours from this moment in the Scripture. There's the arrest. There's all the accusations. There's the interaction with Pilate. There's the obviously the betrayals and all of that stuff. And, of course, the pain and the shedding of blood. But we miss something significant, I think, if we allow those things to rise up and become more central than having loved his own who were in the world. He loved them to the end. There is something about the fixation of Jesus' love on you and me through those men. If we can get it, if we can feel it, if we can receive it. Never lost sight. Here's the next verse. So during supper, the devil, having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, and again, so now we get a look inside Jesus' head. Knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands. Wow. I don't even know how to process that. I don't know how to process that. But I'm trying to just let it sink into me that this is one of the abiding, conscious, contemporary, current thoughts in Jesus' head. Knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God. This is what he did. He got up from supper and laid aside his garment, and taking a towel, he girded himself. So, again, if we can slow down, I believe that the Holy Spirit can help us have a connection with God right now. A connection with Jesus and what drove him, carried him, led him to the cross. There's some amazing stuff said about that. It says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, despising its shame. Why? How? Because he knew that that he'd come from the Father and that he was going back to the Father? Yeah, in that knowledge. But this is what he did. This is what that consciousness motivated him to do. He got up from supper, and he laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. And you know the story. He washed the disciples' feet. Which disciples? And we're going to stop at 17. But if we go into 18 is when Jesus gets troubled in spirit. Because he goes, one among you is going to betray me. And they were all shocked. And they couldn't discern who it was. So Peter motioned for John to ask him. And John leaned back, or was already leaning there, and he asked Jesus who it was. And you would expect, in an awkward time like that, maybe a cryptic answer or something. He says, well, it's the guy that I'm going to dip the bread in and hand to. And then a few seconds later, he dipped in the bread and he handed it to Judas. So John knew. Now, the others still didn't know. And Jesus said, just shortly after that, in verse 18, he said, now my spirit is troubled. So he was in this moment. He was in this moment in that room with these men, fully conscious of the cosmic realities that are going on, where he'd come from, where he's going, that now the time was up. He had been telling them all along, leading up to this, as we remember from that journey back from Ephraim forward, he had been telling them that we're going to go to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be betrayed and arrested, and I'm going to be killed, and then I'm going to raise from the dead. So he was never cryptic. He was never out of touch with those kind of things. But here, it didn't deter him from loving them to the end, and it didn't deter him from this act of service. So what he did was he took a towel and he girded himself with it, and then he poured some water. Okay. Now, I don't know what you guys think about foot washing, and when I was preparing this, I thought foot washing has got so many dimensions to it. Like, for one, he says, in a minute, we're going to look at it, he says, I gave you an example, you should do it. I don't understand why we don't wash feet all the time, you know. It's just not. I think I do a little bit. I'll talk about it tonight, but or in a few minutes. But I don't know. You might be nervous out there right now. Foot washing is an awkward thing in our culture because we don't wear sandals. That's one reason. You know, we have socks or pantyhose or boots or whatever the case is. But this act, you know, in other words, girding himself with it, or however, I used to couldn't do that. I'm a little skinnier than I used to be. You know, you could do that. And he took off his clothes. I'm not going to do that. But it's a real act, is what I'm trying to say. It's not a spiritual metaphor. This is the one who was from God, who knew he was going back to God. He knew his time was at an end. He was loving these people, these men, to the end, and the way he loved them in this moment was he poured some water out, and he got ready to wash their feet. So there's a little story here. Then he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter and said to him, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? And it was obvious that he was incredulous at this. You know, like, there's no way. There's no way. Lord, do you wash my feet? And Jesus answered and said to him, and he told him the truth. Again, he's loving people that he loves through to the end. And so he's not being dishonest. He's not trying to, and this is something I did gain, you know, some understanding. He's not trying to establish a new or a religious ritual or something like that. He said, what I do, you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. So what was he doing? Well, Peter's protesting, but then he gets into it. Peter said, never will I let you wash my feet. There's no way. Now, this is the same Peter that said, no, Lord, you can't go to Jerusalem and die. We're not going to let that happen. And it wasn't so fresh in his memory that he probably couldn't recall it, but Jesus had to say to him at that time, get thee behind me, Satan, right? So, but I don't want us to throw Peter under the bus, because there's humility here. There's a devotion to the Lord. Again, later, and we're not going to have time to cover it, but if we were to go all the way through John chapter 13, you'll remember that Jesus says, where I'm going, you guys can't go. And like I'm told the Jews, I'm telling you, you can't follow me right now. Peter says, well, where are you going to go? Why can't we follow you? I'd follow you to death. He goes, would you? He said, before the rooster crows, again, you're going to deny me. That's St. Peter. Now, he wised up quicker in this scenario. And he said, Jesus said to him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Now, we're going to have to try to wrestle with what that means, to plug ourselves into Jesus at this moment, okay? And into who we are with him. But Simon Peter said, well, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. And Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. So let's stick it with the Peter thing first. Peter took the rebuke and said, well, if that's what it takes, then here I am. Give me a once over all the way. And Jesus said, no, that's not necessary. So pondering this response by Jesus helped me understand and kind of get beyond my complaint of why we don't wash feet in the church more, historically, why it's not a more common. And I know it does happen in places. But it really was addressed at a need. It was not the beginning of a religious ceremony. These guys had walked to this place in sandaled feet on dirt roads. And both ceremonially and practically, their feet were dirty. And you sit there on the floor, on pillows. You're reclining on one another in close quarters. So I don't pretend to know all the ceremonial significance, and there was. And I don't pretend to think I fully understand just the practical, but there was. So maybe it is true. The reason we don't do foot washing more is we don't live in a sandaled society. But I still have water here, and we might still wash each other's feet if you want. But regardless of whether we get to that or not, and I'm not trying to make an excuse not to, Jesus said, if I don't wash you, you have no part with me. That means that Peter had to receive what Jesus was offering. That was another thing that the Lord's been talking to me about in this idea of hearing his voice, doing what he says. Receive what I say. It's our response. It makes possible the thing that he's giving us. It makes possible the impact of that thing. And so, obviously, Peter did, and it was cool. And then Jesus said, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you remember later on, in this same last night discourse, Jesus tells them, you're clean by the word I've spoken to you. And I would say here to you guys and to me, we're clean because of what Jesus has done. We need to understand that. We need to believe that. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to receive what Jesus continues to offer by way of cleansing. Not as a religious exercise and not as an assuagement to guilt or anything like that, just simply because we're in a relationship with this Son of Man. And he is in a relationship with us. And that relationship, in spite of the fact that he was keenly aware that his time had come, it says. He was keenly aware that he had come from God and now was returning to his Father. He was aware that a few more hours and a few more steps was going to bring him to that commission which he had received as the lamb slain before the foundation of the cosmos. This is why he was born in the Virgin Mary. This is why he took on the shape of a zygote and a fetus and an infant. And yet, his head and his heart was in a relationship with these men. And yeah, one of them was Peter, and Peter was kind of impetuous. And one of them was John, who was comfortable leaning in close to Jesus and calling himself the disciple he loved. Did you know who another one was? It was Judas. It was Judas. Now, we haven't skipped any verses so far. And you know, there's no place where Judas has been dismissed yet. Jesus girded himself with that towel, he took that water, and he walked around. And the only interaction we get of the foot washing is with Peter. But before Jesus finished, he washed Judas's feet. And he didn't make an exception in what, or at least John in his narration of this, didn't make an exception. And he loved them except Judas until the end. That's powerful. And he didn't do it out of ignorance, because he knew says, for he knew the one who was betraying him, and for this reason he said, not all of you are clean. And it caused quite a stir. Jesus was not deterred. He was not thrown off his focus by knowing that his time was up. He was not thrown off his focus by knowing that he had come from God and was returning to God. He was not thrown off his focus by the anticipation of what was coming. He was not thrown off his focus, except maybe briefly in verse 18 when we get there, which we won't on the slide, but I'm troubled in my spirit because one of you is going to betray me. But it didn't deter him from the course. Not all of you are clean, but all of you are loved to the end. Not all of you are clean, but I'm going to wash the feet of every one of you.